Well, welcome everyone. We are very excited that you decided to take part in this webinar where we are going to do an update and an overview of the North Carolina pre-service training. You've probably been hearing about the redesign of pre-service, and we wanted to take this opportunity to share with you where we are in that process and what we have planned for the next year. Just as a way of introductions, my name is Tammy Shook. I am the Interim Deputy Director for County Operations with NCDSS, and I'm going to let Lindsay introduce herself.
All right, thanks, Tammy. Hi, everybody. I am Lindsay Nardenberg. I am a consultant with Public Knowledge who's been working very closely with North Carolina, and I am the project manager overseeing the North Carolina pre-service training redesign on the Public Knowledge side.
Thank you, Lindsay. So a brief overview of what we will cover in this webinar is we're going to talk about why we're changing pre-service training, a little bit about the implementation timeline and the training pilots. We will go over at a high level the training curriculum and the training topics. And one of the things that I'm very excited about, we're going to talk about the supervisory support and then next steps. So that is our overview for this webinar. So why do we need to change North Carolina's pre-service, or why now? And we have been hearing for some time that we needed to change pre-service. That's feedback that we've been getting both from county directors, from staff entering the field and then choosing to leave the field. And so we want to make sure that when we have new staff coming on board, that we're giving them a training experience that not only goes over policy, but that offers knowledge and skills and behaviors in a way that they can practice it real time and learn how to engage families that will ultimately improve the outcomes that we're trying to achieve. We want it to support staff retention. We are also implementing a practice model in North Carolina, and to align with that practice model, we have the practice standards, which many of you have been taking those e-learnings. That has been rolled into the pre-service redesign, and also to implement and revise the structured decision-making tools that will be part of safety organized practice. And when you think about resources, we're all struggling with resources right now. So this is a way to maximize resources at all levels, county, regional, and state, and be very clear about roles and responsibilities so that we're all able to work together and give the best instructions and feedback and guidance to new workers. So the implementation timeline, you can see here, we have 3 phases for this coming calendar year. We are in phase 1 right now, which is train the trainers, and very excited to say that we have both state staff who will be trained in the train the trainers, and also some of our county partner staff from Onslow County who have trainers that will be also trained in the training of the trainers, and they will also be observing some of the training. We will have 3 pilot cohorts during phase 2. The first will begin the end of February, and in between each of those pilot cohorts, we will be making small tweaks to the training as we get feedback from each of the cohorts. And then at the end of phase 2, we will take all of the information gathered from phase 2 and any other changes that might need to be made because of changes to legislation or policy, and tweak that training, look at the evaluation, make final revisions, and be ready to roll into full implementation statewide during phase 4, which will happen in January of 2024. There will be 3 pilot cohorts. These will all be in Region 6, which is our innovation zone for the pre-service redesign. They will be in Cumberland, Onslow, and Duplin counties. Again, we'll be starting in February, late February of 2023, and wrapping up those 3 cohorts in September. Each of the cohorts have 7 weeks of training. 1 week of foundation and then core, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that in detail in just a moment.
Okay, So in addition to the pilot training itself, Public Knowledge and North Carolina will be providing additional support and resources throughout that pilot, as well as into the statewide implementation. So there will be coaches that will provide support to the trainers that are going through and training that pilot in each of our 3 training cohorts. There will also be weekly office hours provided to the trainers. This will be an opportunity to ask questions, troubleshoot any challenges, talk about some successes, and share with each other. We have also developed a supervisory guide to accompany the training, which we will talk about in more detail in just a few moments, but that is something that is specific to supervisors to support them as they support their new workers. And then in addition to that, we have created a supervisor community of practice. And once we get to statewide implementation in January of 2024, we will also be providing monthly office hours to the trainers, whether they're state trainers or county trainers, again, as an opportunity to ask questions, troubleshoot, talk about those successes that the trainers are seeing. And then, as Tammy mentioned, we will have a pilot evaluation. This will be completed through an observation of the pilot training. So coming out to North Carolina, observing that pilot as it's occurring. There will be a weekly evaluation tool that is going to be completed by the new workers going through the training, as well as the trainers themselves. There will also be surveys after each of our cohort and post-training as well to really gauge how much information new workers are using in their field, how successful that training has been, areas where we may need to make some improvements or changes. We will have key participant focus groups. So that would be focus groups with our new workers, supervisors of those new workers, the trainers themselves. And then we will complete individual interviews with the trainers too, really as a way to get an understanding of where they were seeing successes and challenges in the training and where we may need to make some revisions prior to statewide implementation.
So the training overview, as you can see here, you have 4 hours of pre-work, and the foundation training is 4 days or 28 hours. It's actually about 3.5 days. And the foundation training is going to be required for anyone who does not have a social work degree. So for those staff, let's be honest, you know, counties are having to hire a lot of folks that do not have a social work degree background. So if you have a BSW, an MSW, or you have extensive experience working in child welfare, for example, in another state, you do not have to take foundation training. But for those staff who are coming in that do not have that social work background, this foundation training will really attempt to kind of level set them and catch them up to a place that they can enter into core training and be ready to tackle that training in core. Foundation training, again, is part of this pre-work. If you do the pre-work for foundation training, you do not have to repeat that pre-work for core training. Core training is 18 days, 126 hours, and we're going to talk a little bit about what that looks like in just a moment. Again, if you did not take foundation training, you have to do the 4 hours of pre-work. The core training will cover in depth everything that was covered in foundation training. So you're not missing anything by not having foundation training. Again, that is geared towards those folks that had BSW, MSW, not having that experience. They will need to take foundation training. The supervisory guide that Lindsay mentioned will cover both foundation and core training, and it will give supervisors tips and ideas of how to enhance transfer of learning opportunities for staff in both of those. You see their option year 2, where we're talking about track trainings. We're not going to talk about that today. Again, we're just focused on the pre-service redesign, base year and option year 1. When you think about North Carolina's pre-service training and where we were and where we are in comparison to other states' training programs, if you look at this down there on the left-hand side of the screen, you see North Carolina, and that's where we currently are with our current pre-service as far as days of classroom training. The other thing I would note is that if you look at that light blue, all of that is days of classroom training. We really do not have any practicum training in there or any e-learnings other than that first week of module training. When you think about adding in all of these hours and days that I just went over, it moves North Carolina to where the star is on this graph. And that is North Carolina Foundation plus core. So even with all of that additional time added to our pre-service training, we've just moved up to almost midpoint of where you compare us to other states. And what you'll see in days of practicum, if that was listed out here, is that we have some opportunities for staff to be back in the counties practicing what they're learning, and that's a really exciting piece of this. So I like this visual. It's a great way to keep in mind of where we are currently at the very, very bottom of how much time we spend in pre-service training, and that with this additional time added, we've moved up to about the midpoint of where we are in comparison to other states.
All right. And then as Tammy has talked about, the pre-service training redesign really now is going to include two separate kind of sub-trainings or modules within that, the foundation training and the core training. So as Tammy said, the foundation training is only required for new hires who do not have a social work degree, so that BSW or MSW, and who do not have that extensive child welfare experience. So if your agency hires somebody that does not have a BSW or MSW, but perhaps they have worked in another county or another state in child welfare as an assessment worker, they can be exempt from the foundation training. However, if they do not either have that BSW, MSW, or that experience, then they would be required to complete the foundation training. Again, this is going to really provide that introduction to social work and child welfare. It is really meant to give them, I compare it to that social work, child welfare 101 course that many students take that first year that they're getting their BSW, really to catch those new hires up that don't have that background with where new hires that do have that child welfare background, whether it's a degree or prior experience, to catch them up so that they are on that same track or same pace as them. After completing the foundation training, those new hires will then continue their training with the core training. So they will also be completing that core training as well and meeting up with the rest of their cohort. The foundation training is 28 hours or 4 days in length. Which includes the 4 hours of that e-learning pre-work that we had talked about, and then 3.5 days of classroom-based training as well. And then once those workers complete foundation training, they will move on to core training. So core training is going to be required for all new child welfare staff, regardless of their degree or experience. So anyone that is hired will be completing the core training. Core training is really going to provide that in-depth overview of the roles and responsibilities and opportunities for skills-based learning. So it's really going to go into the different roles of child welfare in North Carolina. So the intake, CPS assessment, our in-home workers, permanency, adoption, all of that is going to be covered in this core training. Core training is 126 hours or 18 days in length, and it is completed over 6 consecutive weeks. This also includes that 4 hours of the e-learning pre-work. We will talk in just a moment about the training cadence for core. So while it is 18 days in length and those 6 consecutive weeks, new workers are not going to training 5 days a week. They will be in the training classrooms 3 days a week and then back at their agencies 2 days every single week. And we will show a visual in just a moment to really see what that actually will look like in practice when workers are going through the pre-service training. But before we get to that, Tammy, do you just want to touch on the direct client contact requirement?
Yes, thank you, Lindsay. This is a question that came up when we were talking with the Region 6 directors, so we wanted to make sure and talk with you about this as well. As you know, North Carolina is legislatively required to provide 72 hours of training to child welfare staff before they can have direct client contact. So one of the questions was, when during this course will someone have reached that 72-hour threshold? And the answer to that is after week 4 of core training. Foundation training does not count towards the 72 hours, so only the hours beginning with the core training counts. So after week 4, staff would have completed the 72 hours of legislatively required training that we currently have as part of our system. We would strongly encourage counties to allow staff to complete all of the core training before they assign cases to workers, but they can definitely, after that week 4, begin to take on some case work, such as calling collaterals, maybe doing a follow-up visit for a case where they have gone out and shadowed a worker for a home visit, things like that. And we'll talk a little bit more about things they could do. But again, after week 4 of core training, they will have fulfilled the 72-hour mark for the legislatively required pre-service training for direct client contact.
Thanks, Tammy. So again, like I said, with the core training, there is that cadence where workers are going to be in the training classroom 3 days every week and then back at their agencies for 2 days. And this is what that will really look like. So this is showing you week 1 and week 2. We have set this up so that it snakes. So for example, week 1, Monday through Wednesday, workers are going to be in the training classroom. And then Thursday and Friday of week 1 and Monday and Tuesday of week 2, they're at their county agencies. And we really wanted to kind of have that larger chunk of time where workers can be at their agencies, completing those onboarding duties, meeting with their supervisors, observing new worker or observing lead workers or their supervisor out in the field, whatever, if there's training that needs to be completed, whatever those onboarding activities would be at their county agencies. And then after Tuesday on week 2, Wednesday through Friday, they are again back in the training classroom. And then you can see that starts over with week 3 and week 4, and then again with week 5 and week 6. So it really is like a snake every single week, but allowing those larger amounts of time where new workers can be at their county agencies. All right, and then looking at the training topics. So we want to provide an overview of what to expect as your new workers go through the new pre-service training redesign. But we really wanted to start by showing how the training is set up and how each of those topics will be set up, because it is quite a bit different. One really big thing that we wanted to make sure was covered in the training redesign was the required skills and behaviors. So if we look at each of those topics, we really start with introducing what the concept is. So if it is permanency, we begin by defining what permanency is. What are the permanency options that are allowed in North Carolina? Then we move on to why is it important. So this is really looking at those best practice standards where national research is brought in, data, if that was available, that was brought in, and not just national data, but also comparing that with North Carolina data as well. So really trying to bring in that data for new workers to see it. And then going into the policy requirements. So we can't talk about a concept without also introducing what are workers required to do in North Carolina for permanency, for CPS assessments, in cases that are impacted by domestic violence. What are those workers going to be required to do? So it's really explaining the policy and statutory requirements, both state and federal will be explained. And then you'll see in the bottom of this pyramid, the foundation is the required skills and behaviors. And this is what's going to get us to best practice and improved outcomes for children, youth, and families. This is going to be the providing opportunities for skills practice during learning labs and some transfer of learning opportunities as well when workers are back in their agencies for those 2 days every week. So this really is the foundation of this training, is making sure that workers are not just learning the policy, but they're getting opportunities to practice those skills. And as supervisors, being able to identify where my worker may need some more assistance, maybe their professional development plan. We're really going to work with them on having some of those crucial conversations with families that can be very nerve-wracking, or preparing families for court, things like that. So that's really going to be the foundation of each of those topics. And then just briefly going over what the topics are for the e-learnings, foundation, and core. So you can see these are the e-learning modules that will be required. So there are 5 brand new e-learning modules, and then the last one is the North Carolina Worker Practice Standards, which is actually 18 modules within 5 topics. So communicating, engaging, assessing, planning, and implementing. Those 18 modules are very, very short. So it sounds a little bit scarier than it is, but they are really short modules. And this is all the e-learning pre-work that must be completed prior to a worker going to foundation or core. And then in looking at the foundation training, these 6 topics are the larger, broad topics that are covered. Within each of these topics, there are subtopics that are covered. So, for example, in ethics and equity and child welfare, new workers will also be introduced to family-centered practice, to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, to the NASW Code of Ethics, treating families with dignity and respect, professional boundaries, and confidentiality. Additionally, I want to just point out that each of these topics are covered in foundation training. They're gone over in much more detail in core. So again, this is really just to catch those new workers up that don't have that child welfare background with where their peers will be in that core training. And then in the core training, you can see there are 11 larger topics, but again, within each of these larger topics, there are subtopics that are covered. So for example, our topic 4, engaging families through family-centered practice. So that is covered in foundation. We're revisiting it here and talking about using family-centered practice to engage families. There's a learning lab component. So that's where they're getting that skills practice. Using a strengths-based perspective, again, there's a learning lab there. Having courageous conversations and conflict resolution. Involving fathers, non-resident parents, and relatives, which includes engaging incarcerated parents as well. Looking at child and family team meetings, again, there are learning lab components where new workers are getting to practice those skills. Developing goals with the families and creating those family services agreements, which are gone into more detail in home and the permanency planning sections. And then preparing the child and family for court. So that is everything that's covered just in the engaging families topic. You can imagine then that each of these topics does have quite a few different subtopics that are covered. And then each one has learning lab components throughout where new workers are really getting those opportunities to practice what they're learning. And then in addition to the training, we have some companion documents and resources that have been created. So we do have a trainer's guide. So this is specifically for the trainers of pre-service, whether they're state trainers or county trainers. And this includes resources and the content that will be presented every day for those trainers so they can prep for the training, use it to follow along with during that training day in the classroom. There's also a tools workbook, which includes the North Carolina forms that are referenced throughout the training, a participant workbook. So this is going to be specific for the new workers going through the training. It will include worksheets that they can fill out, handouts that they can take back to their agency with them, and note-taking pages. And then a supervisory guide, which we'll talk about that supervisory component in just a moment, but this is really a companion document specifically for supervisors.
So one of the things we know that we've always known in child welfare is that the supervisors are really the person who can make or break a new worker. And so why do we want to invest in supervisors? Well, I'm not going to read this to you, but we know that supervisors are the ones that are the person that that new staff person is going to go to and look to for expertise, for support, to help them learn their job in a way that's supportive. And so we know that learners who have the ability to transfer a new skill into their practice as a result of being demonstrated that skill are given the opportunity to practice with corrective feedback during training and then followed up with coaching, 90% of what supervisors do with a new worker that is done in that way, it sticks. It helps the worker really understand and learn that skill set. And so we want to make sure that supervisors are able to support new staff in a way that staff can practice safely and learn their new skills in a way that they can then implement into their work in an ongoing daily basis.
All right, so how are we going to be supporting supervisors in the pre-service training redesign? So as I said earlier, there's really 2 components to this. We have the supervisory guide and the supervisor community of practice. The supervisory guide, is a companion document to the training. So this is really meant to help supervisors be able to see what their new workers are learning every single week as they go through that training. It will provide supervisors with concrete strategies that they can use with their new staff each week to support their learning, but then also to support that transfer of learning as well. So it'll provide different tools, resources, tips and tricks, those strategies that really we would expect supervisors to be using with their new workers to support that transfer of learning, as Tammy just was talking about with some of that data showing around transfer of learning support. And then in addition, it also has an observation tool within the document itself that supervisors can use, go out in the field with their new workers, observe them during assessments or while they're engaging families, be able to identify their strengths and then maybe some of their challenges, and then use that to develop with the worker a professional development plan. One thing we want to note, though, is that the observation tool and even these different strategies to use throughout do not only have to be used with new workers. We really have developed this guide to include tips, strategies, that observation tool to be used with current existing workers. Maybe they've been one of your workers for a year or years. These are all tools that can be used with them. What will look a little bit different is that professional development plan based on that worker's skills. And then in addition to that supervisory guide, we have a supervisor community of practice that we have developed as well. So what is a community of practice? So if you've never participated in one, you may be unfamiliar of what a community of practice actually is. So a community of practice is a group of people who share a common concern or interest in a topic, who come together to fulfill both group and individual goals by focusing on sharing best practices and creating new knowledge to advance child welfare practice. So it really does provide an opportunity for peer-to-peer learning and sharing, where maybe a new supervisor can learn from an established, strong supervisor some of their tips, tricks, strategies, what they're doing with new workers to onboard them and support them through that onboarding process, through their first year plus as a new worker at their agency. Communities of practice have many benefits. So just to name a few, increased collaboration. So among supervisors, both at the same agency and across agencies, opportunities for an exchange of information and knowledge, which will then lead to creating new ideas and new knowledge that can be used in the field. Professional development for supervisors. So it really does provide an opportunity for supervisors to increase their skills. Rapid problem solving. So a supervisor could come to the community of practice with a challenge that they're experiencing with a new worker, or maybe even with an established worker, that they just want to pick the brains of their peers that are in that community of practice. And then creating a connection between the state and the counties as well. So the community of practice will be facilitated by public knowledge staff as well as state staff to really be able to support supervisors as their new workers are going through the training. And then what will the supervisor community of practice look like? So this is something that will be convened for county supervisors. They will have an opportunity to learn techniques and strategies for quality and effective supervision, where we're seeing some of that peer-to-peer learning. They will receive additional support and guidance so that they may support their new workers using best practice. And then receiving support on those transfer of learning strategies that we have talked about. So those strategies are all in the supervisory guide, but we will go into much more detail on them. Supervisors can share ideas and things that they have tried to support transfer of learning around CPS assessments or around interviewing children and families. A supervisor community of practice will have 3 separate meetings. So there will be a kickoff meeting, which will be the first week that new staff attend pre-service training. This is really going to include a review of the curriculum, learning objectives, reviewing the learning labs, and then just looking at an overview of supervisory responsibilities during pre-service training as well as after. So how can supervisors support their new workers? The second meeting then will be held 1 week after their new workers have completed pre-service training to provide support to supervisors, really be able to get some information on how the training has gone for their new workers, where do supervisors need more support. And then there will be one final meeting, which will happen 1 month after that training has occurred. However, and between all those meetings, there will be a Teams channel that will be set up which will provide some additional support between each of the community of practice meetings. It will provide an opportunity for networking and support among supervisors. There will be a discussion board for supervisory responsibilities. Supervisors can type in some different strategies they've tried on the transfer of learning. And then the co-facilitators will provide a weekly check-in for supervisors as well. There will be tip sheets that'll be dropped into that Teams channel. So that will just be an additional way to be able to support that community of practice between meetings. So supervisors aren't kind of left on their own in between each of those meetings. And then we will also complete an evaluation of the supervisor community of practice to determine its effectiveness, make any necessary changes before the pre-service training is really launched into statewide implementation.
So for next steps, the pilot cohort dates will be added to the training schedule. That should happen in the next week or so, so the beginning of January. Those will be added to the training schedule. The registration will open in early January, and then the pilot kickoff in late February with Region 6. And just as a reminder, I think we've said it a couple of times, but just as a reminder, pre-service redesign pilot training is only available to Region 6 counties. So if you are not in Region 6, just hold on. It's coming statewide, and you'll have your opportunity to send staff as well. But right now, we're focusing on Region 6. Again, those 3 pilot cohorts, so that we can make this the absolute best training that it possibly can be before we roll it out statewide and statewide implementation.
All right. Thank you, everybody. That is all we have.
Thank you so much.